The soft hum of the quantum relay was the only constant companion Kellen had out here. On the edge of nothing, Whisper Station was a pinprick of light and life in the vast, crushing dark, a sentinel tasked with listening to the heartbeat of humanity. His job was simple, monotonous, and to him, utterly sacred. For 10 hours a day, he monitored the subspace channels, the ones reserved not for military dispatches or trade manifests, but for the people. He was a gardener of echoes, tending to the sounds of a species flung out among the stars. He adjusted the dials on his console, his fingers moving with a practiced ease. A crackle of static, then a burst of laughter from a birthday party on a mining outpost in the Cygnus Arm. A few megahertz over, a father on New Terra was softly singing a lullaby to his child, his voice a low, warm rumble that spoke of safety and love. This was the true empire, Kellen thought. Not the fleets or the colonies, but this endless, woven tapestry of intimate moments. And then there was her. He switched to a private frequency, one he'd saved and protected. A clear, melodic voice filled the control room, each word chosen with care and feeling. And so the stardust settles on my skin, a reminder of the void I cannot win. Yet in the silence between each cosmic breath, a love persists that knows not time nor death. Her name was Alara. She was a poet, broadcasting from a small agricultural colony called Verdant, some 3 light years away. He didn't know what she looked like. He didn't know her history. All he knew was the landscape of her soul, as painted by her words each week. He had fallen in love with a voice, with a mind, with the raw, unfiltered emotion that flowed from her like a river. He had never responded, of course. What could a lonely comms technician on a forgotten outpost possibly say to someone who could shape the universe with syllables? So he listened. He was her most devoted audience of 1. As her poem drew to a close, a priority alert flashed on his main screen, overlaying the gentle sound of her voice. It was an all-band, galaxy-wide transmission from the Galactic Accord headquarters. The Universal Accord was the bureaucratic body that governed the allied species, humanity included. They valued order, efficiency, and predictability, things humanity had always provided in abundance, if in their own uniquely chaotic way. The stern, gray face of a Velen magistrate appeared. By the authority of the Unified Galactic Accord, Directive 7 is now in effect. All non-essential, emotionally volatile, and artistically unstructured subspace transmissions from human sectors are hereby classified as chaos vectors. They are a destabilizing influence on the delicate psychic equilibrium of the elder species. This human noise will cease. Effective immediately. Kellen stared, his blood running cold. Chaos vectors? Human noise? They were talking about the lullabies, the love letters, the arguments and the reconciliations. Alara's poetry. He frantically switched back to her frequency. Her voice was still there, a little shaky now, as if she'd been interrupted. The signal fades. They say our hearts are loud, that feeling is a shroud upon the stars. No, Kellen whispered to the empty room. No, don't stop. A sharp, digital screech erupted from the speaker, an Accord-sanctioned dampening field actively scrubbing the channel. Alara's voice cut off. Not with a final word, not with a sigh, but with the brutal finality of a guillotine. Silence. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was a new kind of silence, a living, aggressive void that rushed in to fill the space where a billion human connections had been. He spun his dials, scanning across the spectrum. The birthday party was gone. The lullaby was gone. The heated political debates, the amateur music concerts, the simple I love US whispered across the void. All of it was gone. The galaxy had gone quiet. He sat there for hours, the console before him showing only the flat, lifeless lines of official Accord data streams and shipping coordinates. The hum of the station seemed louder now, accusatory. He was a listener with nothing left to hear. He pulled up the last few seconds of Alara's transmission, the raw data before the dampener hit. He saved it, a digital ghost, a memory of a sound the galaxy had now deemed illegal. He looked out the viewport at the silent, glittering tapestry of stars. They seemed colder now, more distant. They had not just silenced humanity, they had severed its soul, and in doing so, they had extinguished the one thing that made Kellen's lonely existence bearable, the one thing that felt like love. All that was left was the echo of what had been, and a quiet, burning anger that was beginning to grow in the hollow space she had left behind. Jin's hands, stained a faint blue from the pollen, moved with meticulous care as he adjusted the nutrient feed to the specimen. The plant, known as a star bloom, was a marvel of xenobotany. Native to Viridia, its large, velvety petals normally shimmered with a deep, pulsating indigo, a color that was believed to be a direct reflection of the planet's psychic and emotional ambient field. His laboratory was a sanctuary of soft hums and gentle light, filled with rows of the beautiful, empathetic flora. He recorded his observations in a soft murmur, speaking into his datapad. Specimen 7B continues to exhibit stable chromatic resonance. The bioluminescent patterns remain consistent with baseline readings, taken before the implementation of Directive 7. He paused, his brow furrowing slightly as he looked at the plant. Was the indigo a little less vibrant today? He shook his head, dismissing it as paranoia. He was a scientist, not a poet. He dealt in data, not feelings. The silence was the hardest thing to get used to. Before the directive, his lab had often been filled with the soft background stream of human broadcasts. He'd never paid them much conscious attention, considering them a distracting, if sometimes pleasant, noise. A particular piece of music, a soaring symphony the humans called Jupiter from some ancient composer, had once played while he was calibrating his sensors. He remembered looking up and seeing the star blooms in the lab pulsing in perfect, brilliant time with the crescendos, their light a breathtaking, fiery blue. He'd noted it down. As an interesting anomaly, auditory stimulus induces heightened photonic response, and moved on. Now, the silence in his lab was absolute, broken only by the whir of machinery. The Accord's official news streams provided no comfort. They were sterile, emotionless, and in their own way, just as silent. A week after the Great Silence, the first true anomaly appeared. Specimen 7B, his healthiest plant, showed a patch of gray at the tip of one petal. It wasn't a wilting, not a physical decay. It was as if the color itself was draining away, leaving behind a dull, leaden monotone. Jin spent days running diagnostics, checking the soil pH, the light cycles, the atmospheric composition. Everything was perfect. It makes no sense, he muttered to his assistant, a young Viridian named Pelin, whose own naturally bioluminescent skin seemed dimmer these days. Perhaps it is the quiet, researcher Jin, Pelin suggested, his voice hesitant. Nonsense, Jin snapped, more harshly than he intended. Plants do not react to silence. They react to measurable stimuli. But then another plant developed the gray stain, and another. The phenomenon was spreading, not through contagion, but as if a wave of listlessness was washing over his entire collection. The vibrant indigos and violets were fading, being replaced by a spectrum of gray. The laboratory, once a place of vibrant life, was becoming a gallery of shadows. Driven by a growing, unscientific dread, he delved into the archived sensor logs from his lab, correlating them with the dates of the human broadcasts. The data was unequivocal. The star bloom's chromatic peaks directly coincided with periods of high emotional output. From the human networks, love songs caused soft, pink-tinged ripples. Heated debates resulted in sharp, orange flares. That symphony, Jupiter, had produced the most sustained and brilliant display he had ever recorded. He had been wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. The human's emotions weren't a chaotic byproduct. They were a fundamental nutrient, a resonance that the psychic flora of Viridia, and likely the planet itself, had evolved to absorb. The Accord, in its infinite wisdom, had not simply censored a species. They had starved an ecosystem. He stood before specimen 7B, which was now more gray than blue, its light feeble and slow. He thought of the symphony, of the way the music had made the air in the lab feel alive, electric. He had felt something then, too, a stirring in his own pragmatic heart that he had quickly suppressed. Now, in the crushing silence, with the color fading from his world, he understood. The Accord's order was a slow death sentence. They had traded a galaxy brimming with feeling, with art, with love and anger and joy for this gray stillness. And they were all, every living thing on Viridia, paying the price. He looked at his datapad, at the sterile, approved lines of his research. It was no longer enough. The truth was in the fading color, in the memory of a song that could make flowers burn with light. He had to find a way to make someone listen. He had to find a way to bring the sound back before the gray consumed everything. The air in the common hall was thick with a silence that had weight. It was the 4th week of the Great Silence, and the colony of Last Echo was living up to its new, unintended name. Alara sat at a small table, a blank sheet of real paper before her, a precious, archaic luxury. Her stylus hovered, but no words came. The well of her inspiration, once fed by the distant, unseen audience, had run dry. She remembered the responses, not the content, which was often just a string of numbers and coordinates from the subspace relay, but the feeling, knowing someone was out there listening. A particular listener, on a station with the call sign Whisper, had been a constant. They never sent words, only a simple code indicating receipt and signal strength. But it was a connection, a thread thrown across the light years. She'd written her poem Stardust and Static for that anonymous soul, imagining a person as lonely as she sometimes felt, finding solace in her words. Now, the static was all that remained. The accord had not just severed a broadcast. They had cut the vocal cords of the human spirit. The colony's morale, once a vibrant, noisy thing, had flatlined. People moved through their duties with a listless efficiency, their eyes downcast. Laughter was a rare, sharp sound that startled more than it cheered. Frustrated, she pushed away from the table and walked to the viewport. Verdant was a beautiful world, rolling hills of amber grasses under a pink sky. But its beauty felt muted now, like a painting seen through a dusty pane of glass. She pressed her forehead against the cool transparency. She had to do something, to feel something. That evening, she went to Enya's dwelling. Anya was a musician, her hands now still, her instruments gathering dust. She found her friend staring at a dormant stringed instrument, her fingers tracing its silent curves. "We can't just let it end," Alara said, her voice soft but firm in the quiet room. Anya looked up, her eyes hollow. "What choice do we have, Alara? They've taken our voice. They've taken the amplifier," Alara corrected. "Not the voice. Not if we keep it for ourselves." A spark, faint but definite, flickered in Enya's gaze. "What are you suggesting?" "A gathering, tonight, in the old geothermal vault. It's soundproofed, isolated." Alara's heart was beating faster now, a nervous, thrilling rhythm. "We read, we sing, we remember what it sounds like." It was a risk. Directive 7 forbade the structured propagation of emotional content. A gathering like this could be construed as sedition. But the alternative, a slow, quiet death of the soul, was a far greater terror. Word was passed in whispers, in furtive glances and pressed hands. As the central dome's artificial daylight dimmed, a trickle of people made their way to the secluded vault. There were 24 of them, maybe. Farmers, engineers, teachers. Their faces were etched with a mixture of fear and a desperate hope. The vault was warm, lit by a single, shifting glow lamp that mimicked a flame. The air hummed with the planet's deep geothermal energy, a natural white noise that would mask their activities. Elara stood in the center, the paper with her unfinished poem trembling in her hand. She looked at the faces surrounding her, these brave, broken people seeking a spark in the dark. "They told us we were noise," she began, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried in the hushed space. "They told us our hearts were too loud for the galaxy." She took a shaky breath. "So tonight, we will be quiet. We will be a secret, but we will not be silent." She looked down at her paper and began to read. It was the poem she had been trying to write, the one about the silence. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, painting pictures of the void, of the ache of connection lost. When she finished, there was a profound stillness, deeper than the accord's silence, because this one was full of shared understanding. Then Anya picked up her instrument. She didn't plug it in. She simply played, the acoustic notes soft and pure, weaving a melody that was at once sorrowful and defiant. A woman named Lynn, who had once sung in a choir on Earth, began to hum, then to sing. It was an old folk song, about coming home. One by one, other voices joined, tentatively at first, then with more conviction. They sang songs from a dozen different colonies, recited poetry. shared stories of the transmissions they missed most. The geothermal vault, a place of machinery and rock, was filled with the forbidden, beautiful sound of the human heart. Lara did not read her finished poem. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. It was a tiny thing, a flickering candle in an immense darkness. It wouldn't reach the stars. It wouldn't change the accord's decree. But for a little while, in that hidden room, the memory of sound became a living thing again. And for the first time since her voice had been cut off, Alara felt a tremor of hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was real. They had created an echo, and an echo promised that the original sound had once existed, and might yet exist again. Torin's official title was Luminary Third of the Vesper Quadrant, a mid-tier bureaucrat in the vast, intricate machine of the Galactic Accord. His office was a model of Velen efficiency, smooth, curved walls that glowed with a soft, steady light, surfaces devoid of clutter, the air still and scentless. For a species that communicated through the intricate, shifting patterns of light on their skin, the environment was meant to be the pinnacle of order and control. Yet, for cycles now, Torin had felt a profound dissonance. His own natural bioluminescence, which should have been a calm, rhythmic pulse of placid blue and efficient green, had become muted. The patterns were simpler, less complex, as if his very soul was losing its vocabulary. He saw it in his colleagues, too. The hallways of the Accord Citadel, once a breathtaking symphony of swirling color and light, now looked like a failing power grid, flickering with dull, repetitive sequences. The official bulletin stated that Directive 7 had been a resounding success. Galactic noise pollution was down 98%. Energy efficiency was up. The elder species reported a newfound and profound peace. Torin found it to be the most profound emptiness he had ever known. Driven by a compulsion he could not logically justify, he used his clearance to access the restricted archives. The files were labeled chaos vectors. He opened one at random. It was not a weapon schematic or a declaration of war. It was a recording of a human child laughing, a sound so pure and joyful it seemed to make the very air in his sterile office vibrate. Another file contained a visual art form called a symphony, with complex waves of sound that made the latent light-sensitive cells in his skin tingle. With a forgotten potential. Then he found it. A file tagged Jupiter, the bringer of jollity. He initiated playback. The music began. A low rumble that built into something magnificent, something vast and hopeful and utterly overwhelming. As the brass swelled, Torin's hands flew to his chest. His skin, which had been a dull grayish green, erupted in a spontaneous, violent cascade of color. Golds and scarlets and azures he didn't know he could produce flashed across his arms and face. A primal, biological response to the beauty and order within the human chaos. It was the most alive he had felt in cycles. When the piece ended, the colors faded, leaving him feeling more drained and gray than before. He finally understood. The humans weren't chaotic. They were catalytic. Their art, their emotion, was a key that unlocked something in other species, something the Accord had systematically repressed. Their silence wasn't peace. It was stagnation. He had to act. It was illogical. It was a career-ending, possibly life-ending decision. But the memory of that glorious, colorful explosion on his own skin demanded it. He began a quiet, desperate search for allies. He cross-referenced reports of systemic failures linked to the silence. One name appeared with troubling frequency, a xenobotanist on Viridia named Jin, who had filed multiple, increasingly frantic reports about the inexplicable graying of the planet's psychic flora. His requests for an investigation had been denied. His research flagged as alarmist. Another name surfaced in the comms logs: Kellen, a technician from the decommissioned Whisper Station. His final log entry, before the station was placed in low-power mode, was a single, unflagged line of text attached to a raw data file. Archived final broadcast, source verdant. Encryption, personal. It was a thread, a fragile one. A bureaucrat, a botanist, and a technician. An unlikely alliance against the entire weight of the Galactic Accord. Torin composed the messages. The first, to Jin, was cloaked as a routine request for data verification. Hidden within the packet was a simple, stark sentence: The color is fading here, too. The silence is a lie. The second, to Kellen, was riskier. It was a low-power, tightly beamed transmission directed at the dormant Whisper station. A ping that would be all but invisible to Accord monitors. The message was just a few lines of code. A question wrapped in a data string that represented the opening notes of the Jupiter Symphony. It was a test, a plea. For days, there was nothing. Torrin performed his duties, his skin a mask of placid gray, while inside, he was a storm of terrified color. Then, a response appeared in his secure buffer. It was from Jin. The message was short. The gray spreads. Your data is received. What is the proposal? An hour later, a second signal, faint and ghostly from the edge of human space, filtered in. It was from Kellen. No words, just a single, encrypted data file. When Torrin decoded it, he found it was the other half of the duet. It was the archived, final fragment of a human poem. Its metadata still clinging to the echo of a voice named Elara. Torrin stood in his perfect, orderly office looking at the two messages. The botanist with his dying world, the technician with his forbidden recording, and him, the bureaucrat who had seen a flash of true color. They were a spark, a single, fragile spark in the overwhelming gray. It was not an army. It was not a fleet. But for the first time since the silence fell, it felt like the beginning of an answer. The plan was a fragile, terrifying thing, a house of cards built in a hurricane. In his sterile office, Torrin monitored the Accord's network, his internal chronometer syncing with the silent countdown in his mind. The Viridian solar flare, a predictable, natural phenomenon, was due to peak in 17 minutes, for a window of 90 seconds. The resulting ionic storm would scramble Hybe and monitoring across the sector. It was their only chance. On Viridia, Jin stood not in his lab, but in the heart of the planet's largest grove of star blooms. It was a sea of gray. The once vibrant field was now a monochrome graveyard, the petals dull and limp. He held a sensitive photonic sensor linked directly to his datapad. He was the canary in the coal mine, their gauge for whether any of this madness would work. At Whisper Station, Kellen's hands flew over the console, bypassing safety protocols and power limiters he was never meant to touch. The station's main subspace antenna, a dish larger than the outpost itself, groaned as it realigned, focusing on a single, precise point in the galactic core. The power drain was catastrophic, overloading systems and bathing the control room in the red glow of emergency lights. He fed the final, purified audio file into the transmitter. Alara's voice, stripped of all but its essential resonance. His finger hovered over the execute command, his heart a drum against his ribs, and on last echo. In the geothermal vault, Alara held Enya's hand. The entire gathering was there, a community holding its breath. They had no console, no sensor. They only had faith. She closed her eyes, trying to project her hope, her love, her defiant spirit across the light years to a man she had never seen, trusting him to give her back her voice. 30 seconds, Torrin's voice was a tight, controlled whisper over the encrypted channel. The flare is building. Network integrity is dropping. Jin, readings are baseline, Jin reported, his voice thick with disappointment. The gray fields remain gray. Nothing. Power at 120%. Kellen's voice crackled, strained with effort. Transmitter is hot. Systems are failing. I can't hold this for long. Stand by, Torrin ordered. His screens flashed with alarm as the solar flare hit its peak. Scrambling now. Kellen, go. Send the signal. On Whisper Station, Kellen slammed his hand down on the console, a single, focused pulse of energy, carrying the essence of a human heart, shot into the void. It was not a shout, but a whisper, a poem. It traveled at the speed of thought, a ripple in the subspace medium dot in his office. Torrin saw it on his scope, a tiny, brilliant spike of unauthorized bandwidth that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Then the Accord's monitoring systems, recovering from the flare, began to blare with intrusion alerts. Signal is away, Kellen gasped, his station now dark but for battery-powered emergency lights. I've lost primary systems. They'll trace that. They'll find me. Torrin didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the live feed from Jin. Jin, report. On Viridia, Jin stared at his photonic sensor. The readings were unchanged. His heart sank into his boots. It had failed. It was all for nothing. He looked up at the dead, gray field, a sob catching in his throat. Then he saw it. A single star bloom, the one closest to his sensor, trembled. At its very center, a pinprick of color appeared. Not the old indigo, but a brilliant, impossible gold. It spread from the heart of the flower outward, washing over the gray petals like a wave, burning it away. The gold spread to the next plant, and the next, a wildfire of light racing across the grove. In seconds, the entire field was not just restored. It was transformed, blazing with a color more vibrant and alive than any he had ever recorded. The air itself seemed to hum, charged with a psychic resonance that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Torin, Jin shouted, his scientific detachment shattered by sheer wonder. The color. By the stars, the color. It's gold. It's everywhere. In the vault on Last Echo, the silence was broken by a soft, collective gasp. Lynn, the singer, put a hand to her chest. I felt something, she whispered. Like a warmth. Anya looked at her instrument, its strings vibrating with a faint, sympathetic hum. I felt it too. Alara opened her eyes. She didn't need a sensor. The air in the vault felt different, charged, hopeful. The memory of sound was no longer a memory. It was a promise. She smiled, a real, true smile for the first time in months. He heard us, she said softly. Aboard a Velen patrol ship. A junior officer watched her commander's skin, which had been a dull administrative beige, suddenly flare into a complex, joyful pattern of silver and cerulean. All across the galaxy, in 1,000 small, unnoticed moments, the spark landed. A dull eye regained its luster. A repetitive thought broke into a new, creative pattern. A silent heart remembered a forgotten beat. The silence had been broken. Not by a fleet, not by a declaration of war, but by a love poem. The great gray machine of the Accord had felt its first, irrevocable crack. And on a dead station, drifting in the dark, Kellen leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face as he listened to the approaching whine of Accord enforcement ships. He had no regrets. He had sent a whisper, and the galaxy, at last, had begun to listen.